Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As we get started here, I'm just going to transfer over my interpretation because I am hearing the lovely French side. Perfect. So as we wait for people to join, I'll kick us off. And my name is Nicole Jamrozinski, and I am the Manager of Development and Engagement at CanWatch. I want to thank everyone for joining the 2023 CanWatch Academy. The Academy is designed to provide a convenient, accessible learning platform for our members, colleagues, and peers. The sessions we offer respond to the professional development and learning needs and interests that you have shared with us. We are pleased to provide this opportunity to support our members in this way and look forward to a great week of learning with you. Today's session is being delivered with the support and partnership of Global Affairs Canada, so thank you so much there. I'm joining you today from Kamoka, Ontario, which is on the traditional lands of Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wak, and the Attawandaron peoples. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to share my gratitude and respect to all the Indigenous peoples from all nations across Turtle Island. They are the traditional guardians of the land upon which we live and work, and I acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory. Before diving into the session, there are a few housekeeping notes I'd like to share. Simultaneous translation is available in English and French, so please click on the guide icon, the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen to select your language of preference. This session is also being recorded and will be shared in the coming weeks on our website. If you do have questions throughout the session, please feel free to raise your hand and Eric and Trevor will encourage you to come off mute to ask them, or you can put your question directly in the chat box and they'll address them during the presentation. And if you have any technical difficulties during the session, please write a message to the CanWatch technical support in our chat box. Now I'd like to offer a warm welcome and special thanks to Yibu Digital for joining us to discuss maximizing nonprofit impact, Google Ads and Google Grants essentials. Eric, I'll hand it over to you.
There we go. Should I unmute myself? Thanks, Nicole. So good afternoon to those of you in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, and good morning to those of you of Pacific. Thanks again for having us here today. I've got myself, Eric Rubidoux, with me, Trevor Brickman, and Tasha Van Vlak on our team as well. And so we'll be talking about Google Ads. It comes in a couple of flavors, so we'll talk a little bit about what it is, what are the differences between the types of accounts, and then really we want to approach this from a kind of from a 101 in a sense. Let's talk about account types, the differences between them, and then talk about campaign structure, how we actually build things inside the platform. We're going to do a little bit of a live walkthrough of kind of a demo ads setup so you can just sort of see, contextualize what it is that we're talking about. And then get into a few more advanced pieces like budgeting, bidding, and then some advanced strategies specifically for nonprofits that you should be considering. How's the pace? Thank you. Great. So let's talk a little bit about what Google Ads is. So essentially, if you've used Google, which I'm going to go on a limb and assume that 99% of people on this call have, there's possibly an outlier, but I'm going to guess we've all used Google at some point. Google Ads is a couple of things, but it is specifically when you type something into Google, put in a keyword search, you get organic results, which is the bulk of what you see on the screen, and you have paid results, or Google Ads, which comes up at the top of the screen and sometimes in the side, depending, and then a little bit different in mobile as well. So basically, it's how Google makes their money. They would love to say that the internet, crawling the internet and bringing it all together for us in a single search is through the goodness of their hearts, but the reality is that's how they make their money. That's where most of their money comes from, and it's the thing that supports a lot of free products like Google Maps and Gmail and all that kind of stuff.
We thought before
the other thing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Nope.
We thought before we jumped in, it would be worthwhile to sort of differentiate the two different essentially types of accounts that that you as nonprofit organizations have available to you. Both of these, I'm sure, most of you are using. One maybe more heavily than the other. The two accounts are essentially a Google Ads paid account, which is a standard advertising account in which you're able to advertise, in search, display, and video, or in this case, YouTube, as well as the Google Ads grant account. And the grant account is essentially an advertising account set up by Google, a program set up probably about 10 years ago now, wherein Google allocates, currently it used to be $40,000 a month, $10,000 a month to registered nonprofits to spend in Google search, specifically Google search. There are some limitations. There are certainly differences between these two accounts that we'll cover in a second, but I see a hand already. So
Cassie.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but my colleague looked into the Google Ad grants recently and said that it looked like you have to be actually a registered charity to use them.
Yeah.
That's true. You can't just be a nonprofit. You have to have charitable status.
You have to have charitable status in order to register. Canada's a little bit funny in the way that this program works. And by funny, I mean in the US, you register for the account directly through Google itself. For whatever reason, and it was a business decision made years ago by Google, in order to register for a grant account in Canada, you have to register through a partner agency called TechSoup that creates a token. The token then allows you to get access to your grant account. If any of you have been through it, it's let's say there is some red tape involved. And unfortunately, part of that registration process with TechSoup is identifying your registered charitable number, which is as of now required. So you're certainly not the first person to ask us this. We have nonprofits who don't necessarily have a registered charitable number come to us and ask if they can sort of take advantage of the account. And truthfully, the short answer is no, not right now. Now, depending on what you're looking to do with it, that may not be, look at this segue. That may not be the end of the world, because there are some important differences between the two accounts. The Google Grant account, first and foremost, is limited to search. So what that means is, of course, all of these other advertising channels like display and like YouTube, you're not actually able to access through a Google Grant account. The second and probably most important difference between the two accounts is the grant account operates on what's called secondary bid. So essentially what that means is, regardless of how effective or how good you've been at setting up your grant account and the search structure, we'll talk about some of that search structure in a little bit, the grant account has been deprioritized in the searches that it shows. And so what that essentially means is you're picking up, I don't want to say picking up scraps, but you're picking up the leftover of whatever paid accounts aren't bidding on. So for instance, if your nonprofit organization is bidding on, let's say, climate change, and there are 15 other organizations bidding on climate change in a regular Google paid ads account, and you're also bidding on it in a grant account, you'll only pick up the searches for climate change if that particular search doesn't match any of the criteria in the 15 paid accounts. Mm-hmm. It means that 15 years ago, when this program was first introduced, and there weren't many organizations using a grant account at the time, it was Google search at the time, there wasn't a lot of competitors in this space, and it meant that grant didn't get deprioritized in the same way that it doesn't currently. What all this has essentially meant is that your Google Grant account can do a fantastic job of often driving a lot of website traffic. Because it uses secondary bid, it's very good at picking up searches for what we refer to with our clients as auxiliary keywords, things that are maybe somewhat closely related to your mission and cause, but may not be, in that first ring. And certainly aren't brand keywords. It's very good at getting people to see things that are somewhat related to what you do as an organization. What a grant account is not very good at doing is driving revenue. And that's because, from our experience, most revenue through search is driven directly through brand keywords, right? So your organization's name, alternative spellings, misspellings, or acronyms for your organization are what are most often actually going to drive revenue. The problem becomes there is it's not necessarily a problem. It is a challenge in that most organizations find themselves in a situation where other organizations are often bidding on their brand terms. So unfortunately, what that means is if other organizations are bidding on your brand terms in a paid account, given that grant is secondary bid, if your brand terms live there, you're often going to get outbid or deprioritized against other organizations. That was a lot of words all strung together at once. And probably a little bit more, Cassie, than you'd asked for when you asked that question.
No, that's great. Thanks.
No. The key differences between the two accounts really are in the way that you get shown and the way that you get prioritized. And it's something that you should really keep in mind as you're looking to determine a strategy on which account you're going to use or how you're going to use each of the accounts. So we're going to talk a little bit about setting up a Google Ads account. The process, as I said, can be a little bit different depending on which type of account you're going to set up, but it is important that you have some of your documentation ready specifically for a grant account. It's something that we run into with a lot of organizations. Some of these documents can be a little bit difficult to track down. The process itself is relatively straightforward. Of course, the user interface from Google side is relatively easy to understand. There is that additional process I mentioned in registering for a Google Grant account that you should be aware of. But again, Google has well documented it. So following along and actually getting the account set up isn't all that difficult. What you will need are things like your charitable registration number, your proof of registration, and your business identification, things that sort of often cause some roadblocks in getting these accounts set up with other organizations we've worked with. The other thing to take note of, and it's something that we run into a lot, is making sure you're using a centralized email for your organization. You know, there is turnover internally, and often what we found is that these organizations who set these accounts up a long time ago will have used a single individual who's no longer with the organization. By creating, what you'll actually need is a Gmail address. It's unfortunate, but Google requires you to have a Gmail address. So what we've recommended to most clients is to set up a organization, insert organization name 123@gmail.com. And make sure that password and credentials are widely accessible, because getting access once you've lost it, if you are not, as an individual, a designated admin of the account, can be near impossible. Google has done incredibly well in setting up security protocols to make sure that others can't access your account. But what that also means is when those people leave, it becomes quite a barrier to get access. And in some cases, we've actually had to create entirely different accounts. In the case of a grant account, that can be incredibly challenging, because for the lifetime of your organization, you'll only ever be granted a single grant account. We're working with organizations now who simply cannot find those login credentials. And unfortunately, what that's meant is they can't use and no longer have access to their grant account. Google has essentially said, too bad. And it really is something that seems very simple, but you know, if I were an organization, I would scrape it into the wall of a building or a meeting room, because it is amazing how quickly that stuff gets lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's good advice. I was going to say that's good advice beyond just AdWords. I mean, we hear that kind of thing from organizations across other advertising platforms as well, where they'll use a centralized, you know, they'll use an individual's email address and that person moves on. And, you know, so very important for Google Ads grant and certainly for Google AdWords, but a good thing to think about in terms of like how your organization, like that created email address can be really great to use as the centralized email address for your organization. So it's something to consider from a strategic perspective.
hand this one back to you, Eric.
Perfect. So as Trevor was sort of alluding to earlier, there's there's complexity in setting up the account, but of course, once just getting the account and is only half the battle. The next thing we have to do is actually configure it as a blank slate when we get these accounts, both in paid and in AdWords in Grant. Sorry. So there's three kind of, I mean, there's actually more to this to consider than just this from a campaign structure, but like from a high level perspective, this is a great way to think about it. There's campaigns, ad groups, and keywords. And these are essentially, and we'll probably easier to see it on the next one, but they work together to kind of create how you're going to connect to the audience. So you can imagine when I type in, climate change as an example, as Trevor was sort of alluding to earlier, there's a whole algorithm that runs in the background deciding, who gets to, it's a market, that's not the right word, it's an auction-based system. So it's partly first and second bidders based on paid or grant, but it's also who's willing to pay for that and what are the qualities associated with that that bid and everything. So it kind of runs a really quick algorithm and it makes a decision based on that who should be getting put into those positions. So that's kind of what happens all the way here at the bottom. You can see where it says keyword, right? That's the keyword that we're advertising on. But if we go all the way up to the top, you essentially, as Trevor noted, you get one AdWords account. In paid, you can have more than one, but in Grant, you get one. So this is your kind of universal organization level AdWords account. Inside the account, you will create different campaigns. So some are things like evergreen. You can imagine that evergreen campaigns are things like your brand campaigns, thematic campaigns around key areas of work that you do. And maybe then into more one-off things if you're an organization that has an annual run, walk, ride, or a gala, or has campaigns around specific initiatives or specific days, you're likely to set up campaigns around each of these. So you can think of this as kind of your thematic areas of work in which you're going to kind of control, separate your content essentially. So we've got our different campaigns at the campaign level. Inside the campaign level, we have ad groups. So ad groups being a group of ads. Yeah, it's pretty complex. But ad groups, it allows you to have essentially multiple variations of ad groups. So you can have inside a campaign, you can have ad groups that focus into specific things. Because as you can see inside an ad group, you have keywords or keyword groups and the ads as well. So you have inside an ad group a specific set of keywords you're going to be bidding on, as well as a specific set of keywords you may be excluding. So for example, I like this one. If you are the Hilton in Paris, Paris Hilton, for example, is probably an exclusion for you. But you have to think around, how do you work with that, right? So there are keywords that you want, there are keywords that you don't want, and sometimes these are obvious. Sometimes these, you learn them by continually pruning the account. Google Ad accounts are very much like gardens. You can technically set it and forget it, but we all know what happens. When you set and forget a garden, eventually you have the end of, what is that, Sleeping Beauty, where it's just a castle covered in tangles. So it's important to know really when you get to the account structure that you do not have to set up, you have flexibility to kind of add and remove campaigns. You have campaigns that are going to be evergreen. And then inside that, you're going to have ad groups, so kind of specific areas inside your campaign. So you might have, and then with that, a number of ads that you may create. When we used to do this, we were joking before we got on the call that I've been at this for closer to 20 years, and I'd like to admit. And when we used to do this closer to 20 years ago, you had to really think through these ad variations. As we get closer to this sort of future that taps into artificial intelligence and machine learning a little bit, there's more opportunity for the systems to actually help you out with these pieces. We'll see this in a little bit, but when you're building ads now, you actually get a little bit more opportunity to set a number of phrases and kind of allow that to kind of mix and match and come up with the best end result through testing. So that's a nice progression. And then really, as you move all the way down, you as the organization have your landing pages. So it might seem like a lot. The way I like to approach this is actually to reverse engineer it off of where are we sending people. So, if you think about your landing page, if you're setting up, let's say, Evergreen for your website, one of the things you can do is, reverse engineer the content of your website and say, hey, these are the kind of high level areas in our website. So we may want to have, a campaign called website traffic, and you might want to have ad groups focused on the different compartmentalized areas in which you work. And then inside that, ads and keywords kind of focusing on that, driving down to a specific landing page in your website. So that's one way to kind of think about it, to bring it all together. So as I was sort of alluding to, with the campaign structure, we've kind of got this top level. And it really represents this, like, the big theme, the objective, right? Like, what are we trying to achieve? So certainly with the website example, evergreen traffic, that is a very different thing than, let's say, Giving Tuesday campaign, which is very compartmentalized, runs for a shorter amount of time. So, for your organization, you're really thinking about, like, what are these top level campaigns that you have, and how are you going to kind of structure them? The nice thing is that inside each campaign, you have the ability to set all of the settings. So it's not account wide. You're not saying, hey, we're willing to spend $500 a month, and you don't, you get the control over how you're actually going to be budgeting that. You can control budgeting at the campaign level. So you could say, hey, for our Giving Tuesday campaign, we have a budget of $5,000. You can set the cap to that. The nice thing about being able to set the cap to that at the campaign level is that regardless of how everything else is set up below it, your campaign cap will stop your spending. So, give or take $1 or $2, you're going to find that that's a really handy thing to control your budgeting. It also allows you to control things like targeting, because you can, as you can imagine, you may have a very specific, let's go with the example of, like, your organization having a run, walk, ride. You're going to be targeting a different group of people than people who might be coming for evergreen traffic to your website or looking to donate, for example. So you can start to think through, like, audience targeting options. You can start to think through things like, is this a mobile audience? Is this a desktop audience? Do we want to be excluding or including based on that? You have a lot of really interesting variables that you can actually start to sort of isolate through, all the way down to settings for things like, hey, we don't want to spend any of our budget between midnight and 7 a.m. because these are all really good things to know, because when you just say, hey, Google, spend my $5,000, they'll spend you $5,000 as quickly and efficiently as they would like. So, setting these parameters around your campaign level allow you to do things, stretch your campaign, be more effective. And then, as sort of on the bottom here, we've got different thematic campaigns for things like, volunteering, fundraising, raising awareness, run, walk, ride, Giving Tuesday. So you're going to think about these kind of, I find the website example can be really handy, because you can think about, like, the different areas in which you're, almost how your, like, navigation is broken up can be thematic campaigns as a starting place. So inside campaigns, as I sort of shown in the previous slide a couple ago, we get into ad groups. So these are essentially like groupings of ads and keywords that we use to decide, when are we going to be bidding, what's the scenarios, and then what are we actually going to be, what keywords and what ads are we going to be putting together when we go out. So it allows you to think about inside your campaign, different target audience segments, different themes. If you're an organization, for example, that might have audiences in the US and in Canada, for example, you may want to think about different ad groups specifically to those different segments. Canadian buyers or Canadian donors respond well to seeing things like little Canadian flags or Canada or Canadian in the ad copy. Whereas that, if you were to use that universally, that might throw off our American compatriots. So things to think about why you would use these is think about what is the language in an ad you want to be delivering to a target audience. Well, you may want to separate that out, and that's where really ad groups allow you to have multiple ad groups inside a campaign to focus in on different target audience and different themes. And then keywords. So keywords, kind of as I was alluding to at the beginning, it's what we type into Google. We used to think of keywords very much as words, keywords. That is still true, but we think of it much more as keyword phrases now. We've all, most of our search habits are phrases now, not just keywords, because it helps us contextualize the results, which gives us better results. So, most people are getting relatively specific with their searches. So when you're thinking about the keywords, there's you want to kind of think about, well, what is the ad that I'm putting together? And what are the words that I would want to be, coming up or being relevant for when someone searches? Again, knowing that we've contextualized perhaps on geography, on other factors or segments in the ad group itself. So now we're really starting to think about, well, what are the keywords that trigger the ad, right? What makes them be visible, or specifically, and these you tend to learn a little bit more over time, but the ones that for example, that you do not want to trigger. So it's although I'm sure ChatGPT will do a handy job these days of helping you with that kind of stuff, it is definitely something you have to think through. You have to kind of go through a bit of a process as an organization and say, okay, are these keywords and phrases that are relevant? Do they make sense? Are we comfortable with them? What are we missing? The ad platforms are also pretty good once they've had a little bit of time to acclimatize to what you're putting in, to give you suggestions, which you can then look at and say, okay, yeah, these make sense, or no, these don't make sense at all. Because again, it's all machine-based recommendations. So still humans required.
So that was a lot. We thought maybe it would be useful to show you what this actually looks like in an account.
I was just going to say, does anyone have any questions as we start to pull this up, or anything that you'd like us to kind of focus in on, or anything that we sort of cruised past that you might want to double click on before we dive into the sort of account walkthrough?
It's too bad. I was really hoping to buy myself a few minutes while I. Here we go. So what you're looking at, I'm sure will be, assuming people are looking at
it's
things.
A blank screen. We see a white, I don't know, we see a white screen with, yep, there we go.
Is that better?
Yep, nailed it.
So I'm sure this is, for those of you using a Google Ads account, this is not at all going to be unfamiliar, though if you've logged on in the last few weeks, as we have for some of our clients, you may be experiencing an entirely different UI, and for that I apologize. I don't control which UI I get, and Google seems to pick at random who it's going to confuse for that particular user interface. We happen to have the old one. We just thought it would be helpful to walk through generally where to find some of these things we're talking about. This is, of course, a test account. There is no data in here, though if you do have any questions about benchmarking, obviously, you can reach out to us separately. Certainly, we're happy to provide some of that for you. Yeah, we just thought it would be worthwhile taking a look at how this actually looks in real life. So what you're looking at now should be the first screen you see when actually logging into your Google Ads account. Essentially, it is your dashboard. This top graph is something you'll see in every single Google account. It will give you an overview of a whole bunch of different KPIs, all of which you're capable of changing by clicking these arrows. Things like cost, your revenue, the number of conversions, whatever it happens to be that you're looking at and just sort of want some quick insight into. It also will, below this wonderful graph on occasion, give you a whole bunch of insights and recommendations. What I will say about those insights and recommendations is take them with a grain of salt. And I say that only because in our experience, a lot of these recommendations often will involve increasing your spend. Now, I think it's worth, again, pointing out that Google's ads platform does not only help us navigate the internet more successfully, it is a very successful means of them making a lot of money. So us increasing our budgets by 5 or 25 or 50% are not often sort of what we would recommend in optimizing these accounts. Often there's ways to extract more value out of your existing budgets by using things like different bid strategies, or as Eric pointed out, modifying your ad groups or keywords. But certainly a place to look if you're looking for some high level insights in terms of what is happening in the account. Of course, in this case, it's asking me to create a conversion tag, which I will not be doing because, again, it is a test account. Over here on the left is essentially your hub for any and all things ad related. So your, as Eric said, your campaigns, your ad groups, your ads, keywords, your audiences, all things that actually control the optimization and execution of a particular campaign or of the account itself. We'll take a look at those in a second. And then up here under tools and settings, you will find, can everybody see these pop-ups as I click on them? Great.
Yep.
Sometimes that doesn't happen and you can't see the drop down. Again, some of this is replicated from here on the left, but I did think it was worth pointing out that you'll also here find your conversions tab. Something that we don't necessarily talk about in this session, but is probably worth talking about at either another session or talking about internally, are the way that your conversions are configured. So historically, this conversions tab, come on, internet, is where you would configure things like your purchase or say an email sign up. And while that can certainly still be done here, the recommended way forward, especially with the introduction of GA4, thank you for that suggestion, is to actually execute a lot of these tags, these conversions in Google Tag Manager. Given that our industry has not sort of made its way, let's say, to the masses in terms of the technology that's used, a lot of the conversions that we require and their associated configuration can often require some development time in terms of things like creating data layers. And data layers are essentially what tell Google what pieces of information are relevant, right? So the type of gift, the gift amount, the form that it was made on, all of these things can be more easily configured in Google Tag Manager, and you can get far more specific with what it is you're looking to track. This page, as great as it is really meant for the commercial sector, where things like a purchase amount are kind of universal across websites. For us in the nonprofit space, it often is quite unique depending on the organization. Your purchase amount can include an additional gift from a DIY event. It can include an e-card or a roundup or a monthly gift. There's just more variability in how we create purchases. So certainly something to look at, to know that exists. But again, our recommendation would really be exploring Google Tag Manager as your place to configure these conversions and then import them back into your Google Ads account.
And one thing I'll flag before you dive in is Trevor made reference to Google Analytics 4 and Tag Manager. PSA, if you are still using the old version of Google Analytics, it dies in July of this year. You do need to switch over to Google Analytics 4. If you have questions about that or have not done that yet, just shoot us a note. We would be happy to give you the pointers of how to do it or work with you, because all data will stop being captured very shortly.
There are, some of you may have seen big doomsday countdown warnings in your account. I think I logged in this 23 days until Google tells me it's going to end. Yeah. So as Eric mentioned, there's essentially a hierarchy in which these accounts are built, and we certainly won't go through it again. But typically when we hop into these accounts, we start with campaigns, and campaigns really are kind of the top of the hierarchy, where you set your objective. They're primarily meant to differentiate objective, right? So maybe it's a DIY registration, maybe it's an email sign up, maybe it's your evergreen brand campaign. This is sort of the place to identify the different objectives per campaign, and build those different campaigns around them. And what you'll get at the campaign level and what you'll get at every level is kind of an overview or a wrap up of what's happening in that particular campaign. So in this case, we have things like impressions, this click-through rate, how much you've spent, how the bid strategy. So in this case, I've set this campaign up as a maximize clicks, but it could be maximize conversions or return on ad spend campaign, which we can talk about a little bit later. It really is your overview of all things Google Ads for your particular account. When you hop into your individual campaigns, what you're going to get is, of course, your ad groups. And again, same thing, you kind of get the high level wrap up of individual keywords that are in that particular account, as well as all of the sort of individual ad groups that you have. And as Eric said, these are certainly sort of separated out into, I would typically say thematic groups is how we refer to them. So maybe you have climate change, maybe you have conservation, and you have animal welfare. Those could sort of be classified as 3 different ad groups. This is also the place where you'll be able to make adjustments to the individual campaign. So it's a little bit confusing. In order to make the adjustment to the campaign, you have to be looking at ad groups. Now, I'm sure part of that is the reason there is a new UI, because that is a little bit better and a little bit more clear, but certainly a place to pay attention to if you're looking to do things like set end dates, adjust countries or territories or your audiences, can all be done in this, oh, sorry, I've clicked the wrong button and now I'm being asked to fix something I don't want to fix. Nice call with Bell this afternoon is in my future, I see. Okay. And then of course the keyword level. So again, same sort of breakout in terms of performance, but you'll get it by individual keywords. You'll also get the final URL and kind of the match type. And we'll talk about match type in 2 seconds as we get into the next slide, but essentially how you're targeting the individual keywords. And for our purposes, we put things in here that are relevant to us at eBoo Digital. You'll also have the opportunity to add negative keywords, which are of course things you don't want to be shown for, as Eric mentioned, and search terms, which are a little bit different than keywords in that they're phrases, full sentences, things that sort of are relevant to your organization. But are maybe a little bit longer or more lengthy, than your keywords. There is a lot in these accounts. I would urge you to explore them. I promise you, you will not break anything unless you change a budget. Do not change a budget. But if you go in and click around, it certainly is kind of the best way to understand how these accounts are configured. As I said, there is a new UI. This is not the first time it will change. It's certainly not the last time it will change. Google has a tendency to change these UIs on a regular basis. So the more familiar you are, they change the UI. They don't necessarily change the words, like keywords and search keywords and landing pages remain similar across all the UIs that they've rolled out. So understanding what is held within each of these tabs is incredibly helpful when they decide to flip everything on its head. Just flip back to this. Can everybody see this again?
Gotcha.
Great. Let me just put this back to a screen and get back to where we were. So we mentioned match types. We won't spend a ton of time here. It is worth understanding, though. Google has essentially in past allowed for a whole bunch of different ways to target a particular keyword. Things like a broad match essentially means that terms or words that closely resemble a particular keyword, like climate change, maybe climate deterioration. Anything that sort of resembles a particular keyword, your ad will show up for. Phrase match, of course, is a sentence or a particular phrase. Broad match, exact match is obviously it's looking for word. Exact match is often most successfully used when talking about brand keywords. Truthfully, Google has really shifted its priority toward phrase and broad match, given people's sort of level of comfort in using Google as a platform and searching for things. the variance in how people look for a particular item has really changed. It's no longer single word, and because of that, if you're looking to reach a much wider audience, our recommendation would always be to use broad or phrase, and then of course for your brand keywords, use exact. There's no hard and fast rule for what works best, and it really does depend on your organization. Certainly for organizations like who have a lot of acronyms, exact match can be incredibly useful. But our recommended use case for this currently is a focus on broad and phrase match. Of course, we would always say test it for yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just looking at my outline here. Targeting and keywords. So there are a lot of ways to target in Google, some of which are useful, some of which we recommend staying away from. Search in particular, as it relates to targeting, can be a tricky thing. Because Google search is inbound, it's often symptomatic of other digital marketing activities that you have in place, right? People looking for your brand don't come out of nowhere. They're often triggered by something. As a rule of thumb, if you have things in market, you're usually going to get more searches specifically for your brand or a particular campaign or a particular issue, which is why when we start to judge the success, this is a little bit off topic, but worth noting, when we look to judge the success of other channels, things like Meta or YouTube or connected TV, we often look at the performances of search and have started to shift clients to a blended return on investment approach, where they're looking at the total return seen across all channels, not necessarily the return of a particular channel. I say all that to say it can be choosing to limit or be very specific in your targeting, specifically in Google search, can often lead to your limiting your own results because it's inbound, specifically on things like your brand searches. You don't necessarily want to limit who's seeing the ad. If someone in Norway, for instance, was here on vacation, saw an ad, went back to Norway and Googled you, it's usually worth showing them that ad. And unless you're finding some nuances and you're getting a lot of traffic from a place that isn't necessarily generating a lot of revenue, the amount you're going to spend to show some of those periphery searches to individuals is usually inconsequential in relation to the return they can sometimes create. And I'll give the example I often have is a client of ours was adamant about only targeting in Canada, and we convinced them for a month to test the propensity outside. And what they found was that there was actually a large portion of unrealized revenue coming from Greenland, because they had an affiliate organization who didn't have their own donation. Their mandate wasn't necessarily revenue generation, it was research. And so because of that, they were being seen a lot, but there was nowhere for people in that country to actually donate. And so the Canadian affiliate was actually able to pick up a lot of that tertiary revenue simply by opening up the targeting. So it would be something I would suggest having a conversation about internally. There's not, as I said, there's a lot of diversity in how you can target, and depending on the channel, specifically things like inbound, it may not be worth restricting your geographic boundaries. Mm-hmm. Sorry. This one I'm going to hand back to Eric.
Yep, awesome. So a couple things to consider. I mean, I know we talked about budgeting while we were kind of looking in the account, but there are a lot of things to consider when it comes to budgeting. So certainly, like, what is your total budget? Most organizations do not benefit from from an open tap of revenue to just spend on Google Ads. It's usually a fixed budget line item for whether we're spending in media, broken down by monthly. Perhaps it's even prorated to be less through certain parts of the year and higher in more expensive parts of the year, like year end. So things to think about when you're thinking about budgeting is how you're going to carry your budget through the year, whether it's evergreen or whether it's campaign focused, and to note that you can restrict those things. And the account will tell you, after it's had a chance to kind of run for a little while, whether there's more opportunity by increasing your budget. As Trevor pointed out, those are things worth looking at and considering, not just saying, you bet, blindly click the button, away you go. Because although there may be more traffic, that traffic may not be valuable to you. So it is worth understanding and kind of keeping a high level, overview on your budget. But the other thing to look at is when we were kind of in the account, you notice there were certain things like, cost per click, for example, so an average cost per click. You can see that because it is a cost per click payment model. So usually you're paying a certain amount in the auction for that click. So when you're thinking about budgeting, you want to be, kind of constantly looking, going back to the garden analogy, it's worth going in and kind of checking and seeing, okay, well, now that I've been running for a little while, which of my keywords are where we're spending all of our money? Is it on keywords that are driving action? Is it kind of on unexpected keywords? And it allows you to say, okay, you know what? We do want to be in market on this, but we're spending too much of our budget on this one piece, and we want to sort of balance it out. So you can actually put budget restrictions on certain ads, ad groups, and campaigns. So, to know that when it comes to budgeting, just setting your cap budget is not your only tool. You also have the ability to say, hey, you know what, we're not willing to spend more than $3 cost per click, or which again will change your outcomes, but with a little bit of testing, you'll be able to figure out what's going to work best for you in terms of spending the budget and getting the most reach for it. So certainly lots to look at. In really, when you're looking at that account data, think through what are you trying to achieve, and then look at your budgets and sort of make sure that your budgets are allocating the way that you want to. And yeah. So a couple of other things to think about. I know, when we're talking about Google Grant, we're limited to search, but when we're in a paid account, we open up. So we have the ability to do things like remarketing. So if visitors go to your website, you can actually remarket them, and show back up in the display network, as well as in YouTube, as well as you can also run. So if you've run YouTube ads before, you know that you actually run them from your Google Ads account. So you have the ability to run video ads, display ads, and remarketing from the platform as well. And something that we kind of have touched on, but I don't know if we've really dove into it yet, is return on ad spend. So as Trevor was saying earlier, we think about return on ad spend across not just single marketing initiative, but to think about your ad spend across your entire digital spend. Now, if you're only doing Google, for example, then your return on ad spend is your Google return on ad spend number. But if you're also doing Meta, so Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, if you're doing Pinterest or anywhere else, Bing, for example, you want to factor all of that return on ad spend in, and figure out how much is it reasonable to be spending to be getting the kind of return that you want. We have had some pretty great luck mixed with skill and testing, certainly, but in terms of driving up return on ad spend for organizations and making sure that we're getting triple to quad digit return on ad spends in some cases, which is really, really great. So we're really happy about that. And it's a great place to look at how you refine your spend. Because as Trevor was sort of saying earlier, for example, if you bring in display and you look at display and you say, wow, my return on ad spend in display is terrible. I've spent $500 a month for the last 6 months, and I've driven all kinds of impressions, but I've raised $100. Well, that's worth understanding that display advertising is not a great tool, not a good vehicle for conversion. It's a great tool for all kinds of things, but not conversion. So what we know is when we take display network out of a mix, we actually see decreases in other places, which are good for converting, like search, for example. So it's worth understanding what the different pieces of your strategy are doing, what their impact is actually having on your overall return on ad spend, and how to kind of blend those together. You want to look at them individually, but you want to understand what the purpose and function of each of them are. kind of in the the different instruments in the band, so to speak.
I will say, if you're an organization who has a relatively successful Google Ads account, we're benchmarking it somewhere around 500% right now for an ads account. I would strongly suggest, if you haven't already, starting to look at the ROAS bidding strategy in your ads account. Now, you need at least 30 conversions in order to activate it, because the algorithm needs to essentially know generally how much people give. But it's a bidding strategy whereby you can actually set target ROAS, a target ROAS. And as I said, we're benchmarking it somewhere between 500 and 700%. So generally, we push it up between 50 and 100% and see how it goes, and set a target of 600 or 700. It has proved incredibly fruitful for a lot of organizations. The algorithm is incredibly smart. What it will do is it will shrink the population of people who you're serving an ad to, because of course it's only looking for people who it believes has the ability to actually generate. If you're paying $10 for your conversion, it's looking for people who will donate a minimum of $100, let's say. So you're shrinking the population of people you're able to serve the ad to, but it often does a very good job of increasing the overall value. So if you are an organization looking to prove digital investment, you need just a lot of money in the door in order to do that. You're not necessarily concerned with volume of donors. It should be something you should collectively look at. And as I said, there are some drawbacks. You won't get as many donors. So if you're looking for growth, then it may not be the right way forward. But if you're just looking for a lot of extra money, it can be an interesting place to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a metric we've been paying a lot of attention to over the last number of years. We're doing for time. Too bad.
We've talked a lot about search, so we thought it would be worth talking a little bit about Grant and how to optimize for Grant. As I said, because it is secondary bid, it's our use case for it for most organizations who have some degree of search budget, who have maybe been in this space for a little bit of time, is to use it as a place to attract new eyeballs. Because of that, the keywords become a far more important aspect of the account structure. It is free money, which means that we can be more comfortable with things like a higher cost per conversion or a higher cost per click. But there are some restrictions that I'm sure those of you using it pay close attention to. Things like the quality score of the keyword, the 5% click-through rate. All of these are mandates to keep the account in good health and to keep it activated. So while we do our best to increase the volume through the account, it can't just be any sort of volume. And I know this because we've tested it. We have tried to insert newsworthy keywords into these accounts, and it does well to increase traffic for about 3 days before Google catches on to what you're trying to do. And will turn the quality score down, and of course then make us turn the keyword off. So you really have to be particular about the keywords that you're using. The best resource I can give you outside of ChatGPT, which of course was not a part of this previous presentations that we've given on these things, is the keyword planner. The keyword planner that Google offers is a free tool that can be incredibly useful in helping to plan your account structure. It will also give you an idea of things like impressions and the click-through rate of a particular keyword. So if you are using it for a Google account, it's a great way to be able to benchmark whether or not it's going to hurt or help the health of the overall account. In addition to that, things like your ad extensions, so your site links, your descriptions, all of these things, the more filled out a particular ad is, the more likely it is to be shown. So making sure that you're really spending time actually adding all of the available pieces into a particular ad can do well to increase the visibility in the Grant account. which ultimately is the goal for us. These grant accounts, as I'm sure those of you who use them, the $10,000 is great. We truthfully at this point, we get a lot of client calls saying we can't spend it, and not 10% of it, 60 or 70% of it. Again, we certainly have found a lot of success through the way that we structure these accounts, or the way that we build out campaign structures and deliver them back to clients and spending more. But there is a conversation to be had internally. If you are struggling to raise revenue in search and it is a priority for your organization and you haven't yet explored paid search, it really should be something that you're looking at, just given how Google has sort of prioritized the way in which it serves ads.
Nice. So it looks like we've got 3 minutes left to recap, and then maybe a couple quick questions if people have. But the reality is, it's, you know, right now it's where most of the internet starts. Most internet starts at Google, Bing, you know, and other, you know, search portals. But Google is the big one. You know, they own most of the internet when it comes to search. So if, as Trevor said earlier, search being symptomatic, if you are doing anything from sending direct mail to running DRTV to running events, anything where someone's going to see you, see your name, and possibly search you, think about that as your kind of reason for being in paid search. Because, you know, you want to be able to control the narrative and control what people see and bring them to the right place, because as we know, you know, the more clicks someone has to take to get to where they want to go, the less likely they are to get there and more likely to drop off. There really are two types. You know, there's the paid account and the grant account. The grant account used to be worth a lot more. It's still a very valuable tool, but you know, we're finding that for success, you really do need a paid account, and likely using them in combination is probably your most successful way forward. You know, you have to think, you do have to spend time, and again, something like ChatGPT is going to help you spin that a little bit faster than you used to. It's a little less staring at a whiteboard, a little bit more conversation with an AI, as well as the keyword planning tool. But like, you have to think through, like, what are you actually going to set up your account structure to look like? And then you have to, you know, GPT is kind of like a really great intern. So you still have to check the work. You still have to make sure that it all makes sense. So, you know, when you're thinking about that, do lock off some time with your team and kind of go through, like, you know, how does this actually make sense, how we're proposing to do this? And then be prepared to be surprised. You know, you can spend a whole lot of time trying to get this perfect. The best thing is to get it done and get it live and start learning from real data, because you can think that everyone's going to search a keyword that you as an organization have talked about, and it turns out that that keyword is an internal keyword and no one in the outside world actually uses it when they're thinking about a theme or a subject. So really important to, you know, just get something up, start testing and paying a lot of attention to kind of what you're doing. And then it's a garden. You're constantly pruning, you're constantly adding keywords or removing keywords. That's just part of the deal. You know, budgeting, ad formats, these extensions, these site links, all these things are important things to look at and really help with the overall success of an account. You get, you know, for lack of better words, bonus points with Google for using these things. So, you know, do look at ways you can maximize them. They also help improve people actually seeing your ad. One of them is there's a recent addition of actually a small image that can be used in search ads now. So things like that, you just want to look at how can these things work for you. And then really big picture, make sure that you're tracking, your tracking is set up. Look at Google Tag Manager, look at, you know, your conversion tracking, lean on a partner if you need to, but like having that stuff set up well is going to make such a big difference to being able to optimize your account the way that you want. And yeah, there's, you know, this is tip of the iceberg stuff in terms of what you can do with these accounts, but hopefully it was useful and insightful for you. So thanks.
Thank you so much, guys. And did anyone have any questions before we signed off for the day?
I have a question. I was wondering about in advertising in Gmail and like personal emails, like I know how it like has social promotion update tabs, and then you can have ads in it. Have you, like, how successful or is that, or have you had much experience exploring that option?
Yeah, it's a good question. Trevor, I don't know if we run anything in the,
We've tested it.
yeah,
There's certain ad units that we're finding to be more of an annoyance, I think, for the general population than other ad units are. The marker for that annoyance is over time, how do the clicks perform? And so initially we ran, we have run a few small tests. The clicks up front are great. The particular ad we were running was for donation conversion. I would not recommend running a donation conversion through it. Over time, the clicks fade really quickly, and the conversion, even on that initial spike, doesn't do all that well, because I think people are expecting another result, as in learn more, or they're being offered value. And it feels, I think, probably too invasive. So how's that for an answer? My non-answer to
Yeah,
you?
no, that's great. That's really helpful.
Okay, good.
any other questions? And obviously, if you have questions later, do feel free to come, find us on our website, shoot us a note through the website, find us on LinkedIn. We're always happy to have these conversations. This is what we like.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Ubu.
Take care.